Inevitably, some will blame us for this man's death. At this stage, nobody can know until all the facts are in.
Good evening. One sordid little entrapment too many, and another unremarkable example of a current affairs mindless succession of bullying righteousness yields a result they will say they never foresaw. A little man, caught by a cheap deception far worse than anything he was accused of doing, despairs of ever living down the shame and takes his own life. You can imagine the spin doctoring that was going on and the delay of a day to do it before Mr. Clean, Mr. Australia, our Ray, read out the auto cue's self-justification.
What we can say is that our story was properly researched, it was soundly based, it was similar to dozens of consumer investigations conducted by ourselves and other television programs and by newspapers.
Ray Martin had his chance to do the right thing, but no, it was the ratings made me do it. Everybody does it.
He was given the opportunity to respond and he invited us to hear his side in a formal interview. Now, we didn't chase him and we didn't hound him.
No, our Ray wouldn't do that. These unspeakable bastards did, however, deceive Mr. Mendoza and then set him up for 3 days of humiliation for Mr. Packer's revenue purposes. Their reporter on the story, why do I gag on the word reporter, Jane Hanson, pleaded the Nuremberg defence.
I was just doing my job.
Not that that garbage was even tried by David Hurley. It's important you should have these people's names, Hurley being the sideshow's executive producer. If Hanson was just following orders, Hurley was the man giving the orders. No mea culpa from him.
It was valid in every respect, but as to the outcome, plainly, it is not something anyone would want.
Funny he needs to say that. Did he fear we might believe the man's suicide was something he, Martin and Hanson did want? In a chilling moment of candour, the other Hanson woman explained why Ray won't apologise.
We can't apologise for doing a story because we do these stories all the time.
How very true. It's an interesting legal situation. Dare I suggest Mr. Packer's lawyers should give some thought to whether the Nine Network will be held liable for the death, on the grounds that they ought to have foreseen it might happen, but went ahead anyway. And need I point out Mr. Mendoza's ethnic background? It's not the first time the Ray Martin sideshow has pilloried Asian Australians. Now, other journalists at work. A poster to ponder.
Catherine's Battle of the Pork.
4 pages of debutantes and their partners.
They don't pull their punches at the Catherine Times, and neither does the theatre reviewer at the La Trobe Valley Express.
Porky and Bess.
The unspeakable Townsville Bulletin, it's one of Rupert's, discovers a new crime.
Kenneth John Essery, 31 of Ingham, pleaded guilty to charges of possession of a thing.
Lock him up. The Robe Community News had the local council chairman cautioning the town not to
take the attitude of resting on our morals.
Such as they may be. One group who never rest are those tireless illustrators of the bleeding obvious, tabloid TV news reporters. Not for them the Shakespearean imprecation. If they speak of horses, they show you horses. If they speak of mobile phones, they have to show you the bloody things.
First, the safety question surrounding one of the most popular business and social accessories of the 90s, the mobile phone.
What makes the system useful for police is that mobile phones can be tracked even when you're not making a call.
I know anyone can be a journalist, anyone, but surely they ought to be numerate. Not at the age where they believe a jumbo jet measures more than half a kilometre across.
Wingspan, 524.9 metres.
At the Launceston Examiner, they're perhaps too numerate, as evidence that
the British public has grown increasingly disenchanted with the royals.
They refer to this year's finding that
34% thought the royal family should be scrapped.
And they contrast it with this.
A 1996 poll showed only 1 in 3 believed Britain would be worse off without a monarchy.
That's a difference of 0.6%. The Canberra Times, headlining a story about a couple married for
60 years,
called it
3 decades of shared love.
And the other 30 years? We'll draw a veil over that and move on to the Warrialda Standards report that
Police arrested a 345-years-old Gravesend man after he was observed to be urinating outside the Gravesend Hotel.
arrested him. They should have put up a statue. And the last of the innumerate is Sydney's Glebe and Inner Western Weekly with its caption about a neonate.
12 weeks premature and only 686 kilograms.
Time for another look at silly pieces to camera. These of the Grace Under Fire genus, and starting with Liz Hayes of 38 Minutes.
Well, this is the main road north out of Kabul. The Taliban are less than a kilometre away and have already managed to blow up this bridge.
Hang on, why the awkward posture?
There was fighting here last night and this morning, and if the Taliban break through, they'll go straight to Jaffna-Nadri's province.
Gee, Liz, why do I think you faked that shot? Stan Grant next, haplessly walking into some Saturday afternoon sport in Belfast.
To just overflow, there are bottles being thrown, bricks in the air.
But you don't need to go halfway around the world to do a silly piece to camera demonstrating your intrepidity. Tim Collett did one at Villawood.
It's quite obvious the troubles with this neighbourhood are still very evident. Just a moment ago, we only narrowly missed several rocks thrown in our direction.
A quick look at the advertising columns is always amusing, whether in the West Australian,
Sound spelling and grammar skills are essential.
except at the West, and the Perth Southern Gazette.
Can't write letters? It isn't hard or expensive.
When that jewel in the Fairfax crown, I speak of course of the Illawarra Mercury, inserts an ad in their big city cousin, can they spell the name of their town?
Wollongong.
Or their own name?
The Illawarra Mercury.
No, they can't. Why am I not surprised? The Canberra Times, them again, invents a word for its entertainment guide,
Kents.
and the Sydney Herald betrays its lack of.
Noleg.
The Stanthorpe Border Post could do worse than enrol itself in a.
Literac course.
And the Mackay Daily Mercury equally should take a.
Writing workshop.
We can only agree with the Herald Sun when it says.
You're never too young to hone your word skills.
And while we're only too happy to see the Adelaide Advertiser giving La Hansen a serve, surely editorial writers who live in glass houses.
Ms Hanson, the member for Oxley, soldiers on making gaffes.
For old-fashioned sailing vessels, do you mean? The Age appears to have someone from the Illawarra Mercury on secondment.
Predominantly resources.
And where would we be without Mrs. Malaprop, the real estate salesperson? This house's selling points include that it is.
Eloquent.
No thanks, she'd never get a night's sleep. One from the Hobart Mercury.
3-year reprieve for Metro.
And it's time for some more silliness from TV, in the form of course it's a flood, I'm standing in it.
They started coming up early this morning and they haven't stopped since. It looks like the rest of the town will go under and it's starting to rain again.
That was Linda Rose. This, by way of variation, is Michael Beattie.
And there's one thing that the people in Charleville would like to say. Without putting too fine a point on it, they simply want to say thank you.
The reporters don't know it, but there is more to journalism than wetting your pants. Travel writing brings out the howlers. In the Tiser, Mark Steen wrote of.
The city of Agrigento, also discovered by the Greeks.
They climbed the hill and there it was. In the Courier Mail, Louise Taylor gave us a map of Tuscany showing the cities of.
Tuscany
and.
Umbria.
But you'll have difficulty finding them. Geographical ignorance extends to the Fairfax Herald, heading a report about Sri Lankan cricket.
India forced to follow on.
And the Courier Mail, again on cricket, referring to.
The second test against South Africa at Port of Spain.
No, that's in Trinidad. And then there's the Sun Herald, which reckons Lithuania's.
Top attractions
include.
The Black Sea coast.
What, as well as the Baltic? Helpfully, this rotten newspaper also cautions us that.
Slovakia
is.
Not to be confused with Slovenia.
Therefore.
Slovenia, not to be confused with Slovakia.
Much closer to home, the Business Review Weekly confused us with a piece by Sandy Plunkett about a place in North Queensland Plunkett kept calling
Blackall
again and again and again. Finally, the penny dropped. Blackall. James Swanwick, writing about TV for the Courier Mail, reported on an Australian drama series being
sold to Norway, Denmark, Sweden and Scandinavia.
He must mean Finland. Another helpful writer on that part of the world is the Herald's Ian Hicks, who thoughtfully gives us a map locating Norway and Sweden somewhere in the British Isles. They're no smarter at the Financial Review because they gave Sweden the flag of Switzerland. Neither were we impressed by Perth's Sunday Times when it referred to
the Malaysian-Cambodian border,
because there is no such border. Radio 4QR and the Courier Mail, yes, the Courier Mail, will disappoint many people expecting a film night about
South America.
Won't they? And The Age isn't too flash on maps of its own backyard. They've located Williamstown at Port Wilson across the water from Geelong. Last of our geographical howlers is from the Herald, where a visitor to
Nairobi and on to Kenya
reckons she saw
lions, tigers.
Why do I doubt it? Turning back to the telly and even sillier pieces to camera, first, Mark O'Brien.
The Harley-Davidson motorbike has its own culture and it's big business.
And when I say big business, you accelerate, OK? He's trumped anyway by our friend Michael Beattie. It'd be impossible to find a sillier piece to camera.
Every bear you see in a restaurant will eventually be eaten.
I can't see what it adds to a story for a reporter to be nervously driving as he or she speaks, but they obviously think it's credible. Jeff Bruce.
Suburbs that seem to be a long way apart are suddenly right next door.
And Anita Clark, look out for that truck.
The study found more women drive cars than ever before.
On to matters of history as handled by people we don't believe, like John Briggs of the Hobart Mercury.
According to historians, the Catholic Church was formed at a meeting in the hotel in 1835.
Oh, yes, but you have to take Martin Luther with a pinch of salt. And we've never believed Dale Spender. Now she claims
it wasn't until the 7th century that word separation and basic punctuation became widespread.
And here's the howler.
But the famous Roman writer, Cicero, thought this a bit much.
So do we. He'd been dead since 43 BC. Miss Spender's a very curious, if not to say idiosyncratic, historian. To match Elvis's photo of Jesus, Anne Susskind has found a book containing
photos dating from 1280 BC.
So there. Philip Adams mangles Australian political history.
The forum is not, as many believe, named for Joe Lyons. The christening honours his wife, Elizabeth.
I'll bet Dame Enid didn't know Joe was a bigamist. But Darryl Dixon, who writes about money for The Age, takes the biscuit.
As the famous economist Milton Keynes emphasised,
Milton Keynes is a rather boring new town in England. John Maynard Keynes may be who Dixon had in mind. And just before we go, we've had a couple of letters from Gerald Stone, editor-in-chief of the Bulletin, seeking a correction. He tells us that some copies of their self-styled Threadbow special edition were delivered to newsstands earlier than normal. Gee, Jerry, what's so special about that? A special effort to cash in on the tragedy? Fair enough. Good night to you.